Hey guys, tonight we trudge softly through a medieval landscape. Frost clinging to tree branches like spun glass, snow whispering beneath your boots, and the wind sighing through empty fields. A heavy hush blankets everything. You draw your cloak tighter, breath fogging the air, and wonder, how did people survive this cold without electric blankets, double-glazed windows, or that weird heat fan in your bathroom? Well, they did. And not just survive, they kind of thrived. With snow. Yes, that stuff you now panic about during your morning commute was once an essential winter tool. In fact, the art of using snow for survival was so common and so cleverly integrated into medieval life that most of it's been entirely forgotten. Which is good news for us, because it means we can dig it up and dust it off for tonight's sleepy little history session. You probably won't survive this kind of cold, just to be clear. No Gore-Tex, no heated car seats, no TikTok recipe for birch bark stew. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull the hood of your cloak up and start walking again, snow crackling under your feet like old parchment. You're headed toward a small, squat cottage, half buried in a snowdrift. Smoke curls from a chimney. Inside, it's warmer than you expect. Not toasty, not sauna warm, but surprisingly livable. That's your first clue. Something weirdly smart is happening with snow. In medieval Europe, especially from the 9th to the 14th century, the average winter could be brutal. Forget the quaint snowflakes on postcards. Think weeks of relentless frost, icy rain, and a kind of cold that made your bones feel like hollow reeds. And yet, people weren't constantly freezing to death. Sure, mortality was high, but it wasn't because they didn't know how to deal with winter. In fact, snow wasn't just a hazard, it became a tool. You duck into a peasant home and feel it immediately. The snow outside is pressed in against the outer walls, especially on the windward side. And here's the strange part, it's warmer inside because of that. Not despite it. Snow, it turns out, is a surprisingly good insulator. That's your mainstream fact of the night. Snow traps air in its crystalline structure, and air is terrible at conducting heat. So when it stacks up around a house, it acts like an ancient foam insulation. The walls behind the snow stay at a more stable temperature, and drafts are muffled by the sheer weight of frozen silence. You might laugh at the idea of snow being warm, but it's all relative. A medieval house with snow piled up against its sides could retain precious heat far better than one with dry, wind-exposed walls. Some households even encouraged it, letting snow drift and packing it down deliberately around the base of buildings. You think about modern igloos for a moment. They're built entirely of snow, yet the temperature inside can hover just below freezing. Miserable by your standards, but a miracle to someone who's been out in minus 30 winds all day. The medieval version wasn't quite as dramatic, but the concept was the same. Embrace the cold to beat the cold. Now, not everyone did this on purpose. In some alpine villages, the practice of using snow as insulation evolved through sheer necessity. The snow came, it piled up, and people noticed the walls got less drafty. No architectural manifesto, just generational observation and whispered advice. Historians still argue whether this was an intentional design feature or an accidental discovery that people sort of went with. There aren't many written records about how peasants used snow, because peasants, shockingly, weren't great at keeping journals between feeding goats and not dying. But the archaeological evidence suggests consistent snowpacking behavior, especially in harsher climates like Scandinavia, the Baltics, and rural Russia. You lean against the inside wall, and your fingers don't immediately go numb. That's thanks to the insulating layer outside, frozen. Yes, but buffering the wind and locking in any warmth the central hearth can eke out. And it wasn't just the walls. Snow-insulated roofs too, sometimes intentionally. A fresh layer of snow could actually keep the heat from escaping straight upward. Sure, it added weight, and yes, sometimes that weight brought the whole roof crashing down in an extremely unfun surprise party. But if you maintained the rafters and prayed hard enough, it mostly worked. Outside, the wind howls, but inside it's muffled, as if the snow is pressing against the world's volume dial. You settle onto a low stool by the fire and notice how thick the walls feel, not from stone or timber, but from the quiet pressure of the snow leaning in. Your cloak steams gently as it dries. You imagine a family huddled together here, layering blankets and sheepskins, their breath rising in pale clouds. A child laughs softly at a joke lost to time. The dog, if they were lucky enough to have one, curls up in the warmest corner. And somewhere outside, the snow does its silent work. You shift your feet and look up. One of the quirkiest historical notes from this era? Some households, particularly in Scandinavia, use carved wooden snow stamps, sort of like giant boot-shaped molds, to pack snow tightly around their homes in uniform shapes. They believed it helped channel spirits away from the house. It also just looked pretty neat, like living in a snow-walled art gallery. Historians debate if this had any real thermal benefit, or if it was just medieval Pinterest gone rogue. Your eyes start to flutter. The fire crackles. The snow has become more than a background. It's part of the structure, a silent participant in survival. And so, while modern homes fight snow like an enemy, with shovels, plows, salt, and scowls, your medieval counterparts welcomed it. Not because they liked it. Not because they were weird. But because snow was what they had. And if you could shape it, pack it, and lean into its science, why magic, you had a fighting chance to see spring. The wind rattles the shutters one last time before settling into a hush. The next morning, or what passes for morning when the sun barely rises, you step out into the pale glow of snowlight. It's not warm, but the sky has stopped threatening you with death, so there's that. The cold wraps around you like a snarky ant, and your boots crunch over the hard-packed snow. You head toward another cluster of homes, these ones arranged around a tiny chapel, its steeple iced over like a cake no one asked for. As you get closer, you notice something odd. The houses are almost buried. Not just drifted on, but actually tucked into snowbanks that climb halfway up their windows. And here's the twist. It's not a mistake. This was the plan. At least a planish. Welcome to the world of under-the-snow insulation, a forgotten medieval survival trick that your thermostat would definitely find offensive. You duck into a low-roofed cottage and instantly feel the shift. It's quieter, warmer, more womb-like, if you'll forgive the imagery. Outside, the snow muffles every sound. Inside, the temperature hovers just above freezing. That might not sound cozy to you, but in the 12th century, that was luxury. The walls here aren't just mud or wattle and daub, they've got extra insulation packed in. Snow, yes, but also layers of straw and reeds that hold the snow in place, forming a kind of winter cocoon. Some households even dug shallow trenches around their homes to redirect melted snow away, while still keeping the packed walls intact. It's DIY insulation, with a medieval flair. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Documents from monastic records. Those monks wrote down everything. Bless them, mentioned techniques for winter securing of sleeping quarters using packed snow and ice-layered reeds. They weren't trying to build igloos. They were just making the most of what they had. Snow was like duct tape. Always there, rarely glamorous, but surprisingly effective. The science is fairly straightforward. Snow traps air. Air traps heat. So the more stable and compact your snow barrier, the better chance your precious indoor heat has to survive the night. People started piling snow deliberately along outside walls, creating a wind buffer. It was sort of like slapping a down jacket on your house. Not perfect, but it beat freezing. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of nice, fluffy snow. In some parts of Europe, especially where ice storms were common, the snow could crust over and become a medieval slip and slide of doom. In those cases, people resorted to snow mixed with hay, animal hair, or even dung you didn't eat during the section, right? To create a thicker, less slippery layer. Quirky? Oh, yes. Effective? Weirdly, also yes. You walk around the back of the cottage and find a small alcove carved directly into a snowbank. Someone stored clay, jugs there, wine, maybe? Or just water that hasn't frozen solid thanks to the insulating power of the snow wall. The idea wasn't limited to homes. Snow was used to protect food stores, root cellars, even manuscripts in some cases. Historians still argue whether this layering method was truly understood by the people doing it or whether it was just trial and error survival. Did someone test 5 types of snow for our values? Absolutely not. But over time, villagers developed a rough code of what worked and what didn't. For instance, wind-packed snow on the north side, excellent insulator. Icy, crusty melt runoff, just a broken ankle waiting to happen. Children naturally turned the process into a game. In some Nordic regions, kids would stomp snow into place with wooden clogs, giggling as they helped tuck in the house for winter. A win-win, insulation and free babysitting. As you settle onto a low bench near the hearth, an older man tells you that each year, before the deep snow arrived, the village would hold a kind of snow sealing day. Everyone would walk around the homes with bundled reeds, animal hair, and snow scoops, patting out the walls, sealing cracks, and building up snow mounds like sleepy little fortresses. Then they'd feast on pickled cabbage and smoked meat, which honestly sounds like a punishment. But hey, it was tradition. You sip something hot and vaguely herbal. Probably not FDA approved. But it warms your hands, and that's what counts. The snow banked outside gives off a faint glow through the gaps in the timber walls. It's like the whole house is breathing gently, inhaling cold, exhaling warmth. And here comes your quirky historical tidbit. In a few remote valleys of the Pyrenees, some homes were actually designed to be snow insulated from the get-go. They had low ceilings, small windows, and curved outer walls that encouraged snow to settle around them naturally. You could argue this was smart architecture, or that they were just really tired of windburn. Either way, it worked. There's also a rumor in some parts that snow walls could filter evil spirits, something about cold trapping bad humors. Historians laugh at that now, but you do wonder, maybe they weren't entirely wrong. After all, cold kills bacteria, slows decay, and hushes the world down to a whisper. That's practically magic by candlelight. Back outside, the day's light is beginning to fade, and you notice how even the barns and stables are semi-buried. Livestock were often kept inside the same building as people during winter, not for convenience, but because animals radiate heat. A few cows could raise the temperature of a small cottage by a couple of degrees. Snow-packed walls and a cow-powered central heating system. Medieval eco-living at its peak. The snow isn't just background anymore. It's shelter. It's part of the architecture. It's your silent, freezing roommate. You crunch back toward your own lodging for the night, if we can call it that, and as you climb under the woolen covers layered with dubious-smelling pelts, you can feel the quiet embrace of snow all around. A stillness. Protection. An insulation not just against weather, but against the chaos of the outside world. And as the wind picks up again outside, you barely hear it. Because the snow, for all its coldness, knows how to keep a secret, you wake to a soundless morning. Not silence exactly. There's the soft rustle of straw, the creak of timber, and the muffled breath of someone snoring across the room. But the outside world, blanketed, still. Snow hushes everything like a librarian with a mean streak. You slip out from under your nest of pelts, tug on your boots, still slightly damp from yesterday, sorry, and head toward a neighboring settlement built on a hill's edge. The trail is well worn, snow packed flat by foot traffic, sled runners, and the occasional unfortunate goat. As you walk, you spot something unusual at the top of the slope, a row of squat, dome-like structures nestled into the hillside. They look like oversized bread loaves. Nope, not bread. Snow homes. These aren't just storage huts or winter projects gone rogue. They're real dwellings. In the higher latitudes, think Lapland, parts of the Nordic territories, The Alps and Siberian outposts, snow-based architecture wasn't just a trick. It was tradition. And not just a distant Inuit thing either. Similar principles cropped up across medieval Europe, adapted by necessity and, let's be honest, a bit of homespun genius. The most famous example is the igloo, of course, technically more Arctic than alpine, but the physics are universally respected. Carved snow blocks arranged in a spiral dome, with a low tunnel entrance to trap cold air and keep the interior stable at just below freezing. No, that's not warm, but if it's -40 outside, you'll take it. And if you're a medieval European herder stuck in a blizzard, huddling in a snow dome with your smelliest goat might be the best night of your winter. That's your mainstream historical fact tonight. Dome-shaped snow shelters weren't exclusive to Inuit cultures. Variants of snow homes existed across medieval Eurasia, particularly as emergency shelters or seasonal hunting outposts. Sometimes temporary, sometimes surprisingly permanent. But here's the fun part. The design logic. It wasn't all math and thermodynamics. Some builders claimed a rounded shape kept angry winds from forming eddies, as if the wind itself were a cranky houseguest you had to appease with good feng shui. Scholars have since pointed out that rounded walls do help with structural integrity and snow load distribution. But hey, maybe angry winds really were a problem. You weren't there. You duck into one of the dome structures and get a face full of pine smoke. Someone's lit a low, slow fire near the center, the smoke slipping out through a hole above. The interior glows faintly, not from the fire, but from the light filtering through the snow walls. It's like being inside a frozen lantern. Cozy, in a weirdly Scandinavian IKEA meets Snowdrift sort of way. Snow homes weren't always beautiful. Some looked more like giant mounds, patched together with sticks, moss, or whatever was on hand. In parts of Finland, for example, people would dig snow pits, essentially inverted huts sunk into the snow, then covered with birch bark and snow again. Total camouflage. You could walk past one and never know someone inside was snoring through the apocalypse. These designs weren't flukes. Even the medieval Slavs and Baltic tribes, better known for wooden cabins, occasionally built emergency snow shelters during military campaigns. One 13th century tale from Novgorod describes soldiers digging into snowbanks and covering their wounds with the earth of heaven, which is either poetic snow talk or someone having a fever dream. Historians still argue whether these structures were widespread or just used by certain nomadic or frontier communities. Snow doesn't preserve well, shocker, so physical evidence is rare. But written accounts and illustrations do hint at how snow became, in places, a reliable building material, especially when your other options were frozen mud or your cousin's old cloak. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some mountain villages, people believed sleeping in a snow shelter could induce prophetic dreams. Something about the way the cold clarified the mind. They even built seasonal dream huts for rituals, basically tiny snow domes meant for napping and visionary snacking. Were they just hallucinating from mild hypothermia? Very likely. But it adds a surreal charm to your evening. You run your fingers along the snow wall, compacted and solid but not icy. Good snow for building needs the right mix, damp enough to pack, but not so wet it turns into slush. Builders would often temper snow by letting it sit in shaded heaps for a day or two. Think of it like proofing bread dough, but colder, and with wolves nearby. Snow homes weren't just about warmth. They were also about control. They gave people power over an otherwise brutal element. Rather than fear the snow, they learned to shape it. It's the same logic behind those villagers who piled snow against their homes, only more extreme. Less insulation as accident, more insulation as lifestyle. And of course, they weren't always human only. Some shepherds built side chambers for sheep, goats, or pigs, an early version of the duplex, where your roommate chews cud at 3 a.m. These snow domes with livestock annexes were especially common in the Alps and Carpathian ranges, where winter trails could be cut off for weeks. You're starting to appreciate the strange comfort of a snow home. It's not spacious. It smells like pine smoke, old wool, and possibly damp socks. But it's calm. There is still. The light is gentle. There's something timeless about it, like a lullaby made of silence. And just as you're drifting into a warm stupor, you remember one of the darker footnotes in snow architecture history. In some famine years, snow domes doubled as burial shelters, temporary holding places until the ground thawed. A sad necessity in some communities. Snow in that role was less home and more memory vault. Chilly but respectful. Still, most snow dwellings weren't morbid. They were practical. Human. A response to a world that gave you lemons and expected you to build a lemonade stand out of frozen water. As you crawl back out into the brittle daylight, you realize you kind of missed the soft quiet of the dome. The crunch of snow under your knees. The faint hissing whisper of snow shifting under its own weight, like an old friend settling into a chair beside you. Snow, as it turns out, isn't just cold. It's clever. And when shaped by tired, frostbitten hands, it becomes something strangely tender. The wind picks up again as you leave the shelter of the snow dome, ruffling your hood and smacking your cheeks with tiny frozen daggers. You trudge downhill toward a stretch of low homes clustered near a frozen creek. Here, the roofs are steep, thatched, and oddly enough, frosted thick with snow. At first, it looks like no one's bothered to clear them. Then you realize they want it there. You stare up at a roof that's bowing just slightly under its winter coat. Logic screams, shovel that off before someone dies. But here in this village, snow on a roof isn't a mistake. It's insulation. Yes, really. Welcome to the frosty secret of the medieval thatched roof hack. First, your mainstream historical fact of the evening. Many medieval homes were built with steeply pitched thatched roofs, not just for dramatic aesthetic flair or goth pigeon gatherings. Thatched roofing, made from bundles of straw or reeds, was naturally insulating. But when snow layered on top, provided it wasn't too heavy or melty, it actually helped preserve interior heat. Snow on a thatched roof works like whipped cream on a steaming mug. It traps warmth inside by slowing heat loss. Snow is bad at conducting heat. Remember that air-trapping crystal structure? So instead of escaping into the open sky, your meager fire's warmth lingers beneath that frosty top hat. As long as the roof's pitch is steep enough to handle the load without collapsing in spectacular medieval fashion, it's a net win. You step into one of the cottages and notice the difference right away. There's a low-burning fire in the hearth, but the place doesn't feel drafty. It's not balmy, but there's an evenness to the chill. No icy wind licking your neck. The thatch above is dry on the inside, snow-packed on the outside, like a weird winter sandwich, and somehow it works. Here comes your quirky historical tidbit. Some households would even encourage snow retention on the roof by tossing slushy snow onto dry spots. Yes, people were actively putting snow onto their own homes. The logic? A complete snow blanket kept things warmer and lessened the damage from freeze-thaw cycles. Roofs that were patchy, half snow, half bare, were prone to leaks when the sun came out and melted the uneven surfaces. A full snow layer was more stable. It's like medieval roofing via snow spa treatment. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate, widely understood practice, or just a happy accident of geography and structure. Monastic records in colder regions suggest intentionality. There are notes on weight-tested beams and shaping pitch for snow load. But in smaller hamlets, it's possible people simply noticed their roofs didn't leak when the snow stuck around, and they ran with it. You settle onto a low wooden bench by the fire. Overhead, the beams creak faintly, bearing the load of the snowpack above. And while there's always risk, too much snow can bring even a well-built roof crashing down. These villagers mitigate it. They tamp the snow down, balance it, use long poles to even out thickness. One man even uses a paddle attached to a broomstick. Roofing and baking utensils were clearly a flexible Venn diagram. Outside, a young boy is tossing fresh snow onto a roof corner, while his sister uses a stick to push it into shape. It's like a snow farm. Or maybe rooftop frosting school. Either way, it's quiet, methodical work, done mostly in the early morning when the snow is still fresh and hasn't crusted over. The interesting thing about thatched roofs is that they're already built with insulation in mind. Thatch has air pockets between its densely packed plant fibers, which trap heat and repel moisture. Add snow, and you've essentially got medieval double glazing. Of course, it's not foolproof. Fire was a constant threat. One badly aimed ember, and your lovely snow could turn into a flaming inferno faster than you can say oops. That's why many cottages had small snowmelt channels cut near the eaves, little troughs where meltwater could run off slowly rather than refreezing at the base. These weren't gutters as we know them, but more like snow dribbles with ambition. A villager explains it to you while casually whittling a spoon, as if this isn't the coolest, pun intended, architectural trick you've ever heard. And here's the fringe belief of the night. In parts of Eastern Europe, some households believed that a thick snow roof could muffle spirits. Superstitions held that snow blanketed not just homes, but also evil sounds, whispers, curses, and bad dreams. Some families would even refuse to clear their roofs on feast days, believing the snow was keeping the silence of God above them. Sweet, weird, and probably a good excuse not to climb onto your roof while fasting. The days grow shorter here, and the work keeps going. Villagers maintain the snow load carefully, never letting it get too thick. Some roofs even have snow vents, tiny gaps near the peak to let excess heat escape without disturbing the snow above. That's high-level medieval HVAC right there. You've got to respect the hustle. You step outside again and glance upward. The roof glows faintly in the twilight, pink from the setting sun. Steam rises gently in spots where the thatch is thinner. Someone tosses another scoop of snow onto a shallow patch, and a low murmur of approval echoes down the lane. Maintaining the snow cap is everyone's job, and it's weirdly satisfying to watch. It's easy to forget, under modern shingles and insulation foam, that people once relied on nature's quirks. They learned not just to endure the snow, but to make it part of their shelter. In a world without thermostats, the line between death and comfort was often one well-packed snowdrift away. You walk back toward your resting place, boots creaking on a frozen path, and realize how quiet the village is. Snow swallows sound, after all. And with the roofs tucked in, the homes feel like slumbering beasts, snoring under their thick white coats. The sky fades to purple. A single star winks overhead, and above you, the snow stays exactly where it's meant to be, holding in the warmth, holding back the cold, and making sure that one more night passes in peace. You wake to the sound of something squelching in a pot. That's either breakfast or insulation prep. Welcome to the weirdest part of medieval snow survival, combining ice with animal fat. Yes, that's right. Tonight's warm and cozy tale includes a generous helping of goo. Don't worry, you're not eating it. Probably. You sit cross-legged on the packed earth floor of a darkened cottage, watching a woman stir something in a blackened cauldron. It smells like wet wool and old stew. You're not reassured. But when she dribbles the mixture into a wooden trough lined with straw and snow, it all starts to make a weird kind of sense. This was the medieval cocktail of survival: snow plus straw plus animal fat. On their own, these ingredients are uninspiring. Together, a miracle of frozen insulation and frugal genius. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many alpine and rural northern communities during the High Middle Ages, snow was reinforced with layers of organic material, especially straw, chaff, and yes, sometimes animal fat, to create what was essentially bioinsulation. This sludgy mixture was used to seal wall gaps, reinforce storage cellars, and even line boots and cloaks. Warmth was a top priority. Sanitation was somewhere near the bottom of the list. You shuffle closer to the fire. Across from you, the young man is smearing a mixture of lard and ash along the base of the doorframe. The snow is already banked against the outer wall, but they're trying to prevent drafts. Turns out that fat doesn't just feed you, it can literally plug the cold. Goose grease, mutton tallow, Even old drippings from the cook pot were repurposed into what villagers lovingly, or reluctantly, referred to as winter wax. In your modern world, this would never fly. Imagine smearing bacon fat on your window frames. But back then, that little layer of greasy insulation could make the difference between shivering and merely being uncomfortably aware of winter's breath. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some parts of the Carpathians, people believed mixing a drop of blood into the snow fat paste would ward off wolves. Not that the wolves cared, but still, it gave folks a sense of control over the howling menace lurking in the dark. And honestly, after smearing beef lard on your chimney, wolf protection seems like a reasonable bonus feature. This wasn't just a random DIY hack either. In some northern monasteries, again, those record-keeping monks come through. There were detailed notes on using rendered beast oils to reinforce snow-packed walls. One account describes a cloister lining its chapel walls with compacted snow coated in sheep grease. The goal? To preserve heat for candle making in the coldest months. Nothing like divine wax worked beside layers of semi-frozen mutton fat. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of animal-based snow insulation was born out of necessity or superstition. Was it the science of available materials, or did villagers really believe cow fat could freeze-proof their homes because the cow was blessed? The line between practicality and folklore is, as usual, buried under several inches of snow and conflicting Latin footnotes. You peek inside another building, this one more of a workshop, and find an old man stuffing snow into woven baskets lined with wool scraps and pig bladders. Don't panic. These weren't for eating. They were winter air traps, sometimes wedged between roof beams to catch drafts. The mixture inside snow, hay, and a little fat would freeze solid, forming something akin to medieval insulation tiles. Stack them tight enough, and you've got the 13th century version of a double-pane window. If you don't mind the smell. And yes, smell was a thing. People didn't just tolerate stink in winter, they embraced it. If your house didn't smell vaguely of stew, smoke, wet animal, and sour grease, you were probably freezing. There are written complaints from traveling nobles who refused to stay in rural homes during winter because of the pungent atmosphere. These same nobles, however, often slept under 10 layers of fur and still got frostbite. So who really won? Outside, someone's loading snow blocks into a low stone outbuilding. As you walk closer, you realize it's not a barn, it's a food cellar. Snow-stuffed walls and a layer of fat-sealed straw inside the door turn it into a refrigerator that never turns off. In fact, some households kept butter and lard packed in snow, both to preserve them and, as ironic as it sounds, to keep them from freezing into unusable bricks. And now your brain probably needs a break from all this greasy ingenuity. So here's a fun little aside. Some villagers believed fat insulation had spiritual benefits. In Brittany, for example, there was a short-lived belief that tallow-packed snow wards could keep evil cold sprites from slipping into your dreams. Probably nonsense. But admit it, you'd rather face a sprite from a video game than one that crawls in under your frozen threshold at night whispering, "Your toes will be mine." You return to your lodging and notice something odd. The door frame glistens slightly. Someone's retreated it. Not with varnish, but with a fresh smear of, you guessed it, sheep fat. It's not elegant, but it's effective. The snow outside presses in like a curious bear, but inside, the heat from the fire doesn't vanish. It lingers. Snow is everywhere. Not just falling from the sky or piled in banks. It's packed into walls, tamped into corners, mixed with the dregs of supper and the patience of people who couldn't afford to lose another degree of warmth. You realize that this whole village, odd, smelly, determined, is one big machine, and snow is both its fuel and its foe. You lie back on a straw-stuffed mattress, grateful that your sleeping space is lined with dry rushes instead of tallow. Through the wall, you can just make out the soft crunch of someone tamping snow into the wall crevices with a stick. One more night, one more shield against the cold. It's not pretty. It's not even particularly clean. But it works. And when you live in a world where winter comes early and leaves late, sometimes a bucket of snow and a spoonful of fat is the closest thing to hope you've got. You wake to the deliciously disorienting sensation of not being cold. Not warm, mind you, you're still very aware of your toes, but not actively shivering. A luxury. The fire's burned low, and a faint glimmer of dawn seeps through the snow-lined windows. You sit up, stretch your sore neck, and breathe an air that smells like pine smoke, wool, and last night's stew having an identity crisis. Then you hear it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps outside, followed by the creak of a wooden lid and the soft clink of ceramic. Someone's in the snow cellar. That's right, the medieval fridge, only colder and less buzzing. You pull on your cloak and step outside, following the sounds to a low, squat building half buried in packed snow. There's no lock, no need. The snow is security enough. Inside the air is still and sharp. Your breath hangs in front of your face like a ghost deciding whether to haunt you or not. Welcome to the snow pit. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval people, particularly in colder regions like Scandinavia, the Alps, and parts of Eastern Europe, used packed snow or ice pits to store food year-round. Long before the invention of refrigeration, snow was harvested, stored, and used as a temperature regulator, especially for preserving meat, fish, dairy, and even perishables like herbs or berries. In wealthier manors and monasteries, these snow stores were elaborate, stone-walled, roofed, and vented. But in rural villages, simpler. Think pits lined with straw or timber, packed with snow, and carefully layered with food, rags, and prayers. You kneel beside a crate of turnips wrapped in cloth. They're firm, unspoiled. A side of pork, salted and crusted with herbs, hangs near the back wall, cool and safe from rot. A jug of something sloshes, maybe mead, maybe pickled brine, maybe just very brave water. What's clever is the layering. Snow, then straw, then food, then snow again. Like a lasagna of preservation. The snow doesn't freeze the food solid, just keeps it in that delicate Goldilocks zone where bacteria go. Nope, and leave it alone. Quirky tidbit of the night. In some regions, particularly Bohemia and the highlands of Transylvania, people actually named their snow pits. Not just for fun, but because they believed certain pits had temperaments. One might be good for milk, another for meats, a third for curing. Did the pits develop reputations? You bet. And if a batch of cheese went bad, you'd hear things like, "That one's been moody since Michaelmas." The snow pit wasn't just a seasonal thing either. Villages would designate snow gatherers, yes, a real job, who collected clean snow during storms and packed it into the pit, sometimes miles from where it would eventually be used. In towns with markets or taverns, that snow could be traded like a commodity. Imagine a line of carts bringing in snow like it's firewood. And all this before anyone had even invented a fridge magnet. Historians still argue whether these pits were a purely peasant practice or whether the idea trickled down from more formal ice houses used by the nobility. Some say the snow pit was a grassroots invention born from desperation. Others argue that royal estates led the way, and the villagers adapted with whatever scraps they had. Either way, the technology spread far and wide, and it worked. You lean against a wooden post and realize snow wasn't just for insulation. It was resource. It stored not just food, but time. Time not spent hunting or preserving. Time saved by keeping butter cool or game meat fresh for that unexpected guest. Probably a wandering bishop or a friend of a friend who just happened to be passing through with 7 of his children. The ingenuity didn't stop at food. Snow pits were occasionally used for medicine storage. Think dried herbs, bark tinctures, or poultices. A cool, dark, snow-lined space slowed spoilage. In some cases, wounds were even treated with chilled compresses taken directly from the snow pit, wrapped in linen. Cold therapy, 12th century style. No plastic gel packs, just snow, cloth, and the patient screaming softly into a pillow. And then there was drink. Oh yes, medieval folks didn't just suffer through warm ale. Wealthy households and occasionally ambitious village brewers use snow pits to chill wine and mead, especially for feasts. A fresh pitcher pulled from snow had cachet. It said, "I care about your drinking experience, and I really want to show off my pit." You step back outside and watch as a young woman carefully replaces the snow lid, patting it down with a wooden paddle. The snow pit is sealed again, its treasure safe. It doesn't lock. It doesn't hum, but it guards its contents with a stoic chill. There's something poetic about it. The same snow that can crush roofs and trap travelers also preserves a single onion from turning to mush. It's both villain and hero, depending on how it's used. Later that afternoon, you find yourself in a small family home. The mother lifts the lid off a clay pot and spoons out soft white cheese, slightly salty, still fresh. She grins. "From the pit," she says. And it hits you. This snow is feeding people, not just freezing them. It's one of those backward truths of the medieval world. Sometimes, survival came from embracing the harshness, not avoiding it. Snow wasn't the enemy. It was a partner. A very cold, moody, uninvited partner, but a partner nonetheless. You sit with the family as they eat. Bread, cheese, a few pickled beets, and a piece of dried apple rehydrated with warm broth. It's simple. Nothing fancy, but you can taste the ingenuity in every bite. The cold, carefully managed and stored, is what made this meal possible. Outside, the sky begins to darken again. More snow is coming, but no one panics, because they know where to put it. They know how to use it. They've got pits to fill, food to preserve, and centuries of knowledge tucked away under blankets of white. You walk back slowly through the evening hush, a little hungrier than before, and a little more in awe of snow, not as a threat, but as a quiet, freezing ally in the art of getting through another day. You shuffle into a small outbuilding behind one of the cottages, ducking your head as you enter. Inside, it smells of wet wool, old leather, and something that might once have been mushrooms. In one corner, a bundle of cloaks hangs from wooden pegs, all of them stiff with age and weather. You pick one up. It's damp, smells faintly of sheep, and weighs roughly the same as a sullen badger. Welcome to medieval winter fashion, more functional burrito than runway ready. Tonight's lesson in snowbound living comes with a costume change. It wasn't just homes that relied on snow for insulation. Your fragile, meat-based, very freezable body had to do the same. And medieval folk had a system, crude but clever, layering, snowpacking, and cloaks that doubled as mobile insulation units. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval people didn't just throw on a tunic and hope for the best. In cold climates, especially during long winters, they layered wool, linen, fur, and even packed dried grass or straw between garments. Snow would inevitably find its way in, but these layers trapped heat and wicked away moisture. Sort of. You try one of the cloaks on. It's heavier than you expect, with 2 layers, coarse wool on the outside and something scratchier underneath. Someone sewn in a lining of felt and, wait, is that rabbit fur? Probably. You stretch your arms and feel the stiffness of it all. Mobility was clearly less important than survival. If you could move too fast, you probably weren't insulated enough. Outside, a woman stomps her feet before entering. Her boots are wrapped in hide and tied with leather strips, stuffed with straw that pokes out the top like festive garnish. That's right, foot insulation was DIY, often stuffed with hay, moss, or even shredded fabric to keep toes from turning black and falling off mid-prayer. And here comes your quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Poland and the Baltics, there was a brief trend of sewing crunch cloaks, winter garments with snow or crushed ice sewn into thin pockets between cloth layers. The snow would compact and slowly melt from body heat, supposedly helping the cloak stay upright and stiff in heavy wind. Think of it as armor and insulation, with the occasional squish. This fashion trend did not, shockingly, last. Historians still argue whether these snowpack clothing practices were common or localized to certain desperate regions. Most records don't mention fashion specifics unless royalty was involved, and peasants were rarely considered worth noting unless they accidentally invented something, like turning into a snowman mid-blizzard. But we do have accounts from travelers, monks, merchants, even bored scribes, describing villagers walking through snowy landscapes, bundled like oxen, with cloaks stiff from frost, and faces wrapped in wool that froze to their lips as if kissing winter herself. Poetic, and a little horrifying. You find yourself staring at a pair of gloves, wool mended several times and lined with rabbit hide. Next to them is a scarf long enough to double as a leash for a small dog. It's not fashion. It's strategy. Every wrap, stitch, and layer was a tiny battle in the long war against exposure. And then there's the snow. You step outside again and see a man brushing snow onto his cloak. Yes, onto. Apparently, some folk believe that packing snow into the outer layers helped create an insulating crust, like frosting on a cake, only colder and more judgmental. It sounds ridiculous, until you consider that modern outdoor gear sometimes mimics this principle with wind-blocking shells that trap cold air without letting it through. It's the same idea, but with fewer zippers and more sheep. One of the stranger practices, quirky and probably not OSHA-approved, involves sleeping in snow-damp clothes. In a few regions, notably northern Russia and some Slavic territories, villagers would leave their outer cloaks wet with snow and hang them near the bed so that when they froze stiff, they'd form a kind of insulating barrier. A frozen curtain. Not comfortable, not fragrant, but effective at keeping out the night air if your walls were drafty. Of course, if you had to relieve yourself in the night, these frozen garments would slap against you like icy curtains in a haunted barn. You learn quickly to stay hydrated, but not too hydrated. And speaking of that particular misery, yes, medieval folks dreaded outhouse trips in winter. Some wore special night robes lined with fur or moss solely for those moments. In Scandinavia, wealthier households had indoor chamber pots wrapped in snow-lined crates to keep them from cracking. It's not glamorous, but it's clever. Because when your backside is exposed to -20 wind chill, your design priorities get very, very real. There's an open scholarly debate about how intentional these clothing systems were. Did they arise from thoughtful design? Or did people just keep adding layers until they resembled ambulatory haystacks? Probably a little of both. Medieval people weren't fashion illiterate. They knew warmth mattered more than looking like you belonged in a tapestry. You watch a group of children waddling by like overstuffed pastries, their arms stiff, cheeks red, and noses constantly leaking. Their cloaks are patched and quilted, mismatched and charming. One of them is wearing what looks like a goat hide vest, inside out. No one comments. Style is less important than survival when your eyelashes are freezing together. As evening comes on, you realize you're getting used to this. The layers, the crunch, the faint smell of mutton grease and wet straw that follows every hug. There's something strangely endearing about how much effort goes into staying alive. How much snow is factored into every decision, even clothing. You return to the main cottage, unfasten your cloak, and hang it near the fire. It crackles softly as frost melts from the hem. You feel tired, heavy, but somehow safe. Snow might fall on your shoulders. It might soak your boots and sting your cheeks. But tonight you've learned its secret. You can wear it, shape it, even sleep beneath it. And if you layer well and stuff your sleeves with straw and don't care how you look, you just might wake up warm. You've stopped questioning the practicality of the snow. It's in everything. Around everything. Beneath, above, and beside everything. And as you lean against the wooden frame of another modest cottage, walls crooked, doors squealing, you realize that even inside the very bones of the house, snow once had a role. Tonight, you get to cozy up with wattle, daub, and winter tricks, the forgotten genius of how medieval houses absorbed snow not as an intruder, but as an asset. Step inside and look closely at the wall. It's not stone, not timber, not anything like drywall. It's wattle and daub, a lattice of woven wood strips, wattle, packed and plastered with a glorious medieval smoothie of clay, straw, mud, dung, and sand, daub. Yes, this was your wall. No, you don't want to think too hard about where it's been. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Wattle and daub construction was incredibly common across medieval Europe, from England to Germany to parts of Scandinavia. It was cheap, flexible, and surprisingly good at keeping out drafts, especially when combined with snow. Snow that drifted and packed into the outer crevices of the daub wall added a temporary, insulating layer. It wasn't planned. It just worked. You run your fingers along the inner wall. It's rough, irregular, and oddly warm to the touch, thanks, in part, to the packed snow on the other side. Like a natural thermos, the house holds the core heat from the central hearth. The walls aren't beautiful, but they're practical. If a snowdrift built up against the outer wall, no one panicked. In fact, they hoped for it. And now your quirky historical tidbit. In some parts of Wales and northern France, villagers intentionally encouraged snow to collect in cradle traps, shallow dips or stone channels built along the bottom of outer walls. When the snow filled them, it hugged the daub tightly, insulating the home while also preventing direct wind erosion of the clay surface. Some folks even threw handfuls of fresh snow against the walls to seal in the heat. As strange as it sounds, this behavior was described in at least two 14th century domestic inventories, in between entries about goat soap and a mysterious prayer stone that smells of fish. You sit on a wooden stool near the fire as someone recounts how their grandfather used to say, "The snow makes the house sit tighter." You don't ask what that means. You just nod solemnly and sip whatever was just handed to you. It tastes like pine and bad decisions. The walls creak as the wind presses against them. Snow muffles the sound. You can feel its presence, not in the air, but in the structure itself. You begin to realize something that seems almost poetic. These homes weren't just built around snow. They were built with the idea that snow would arrive, that it would complete the structure. It's like they expected the winter to help. Now, historians still argue about whether these snow-hugged walls were deliberately engineered for that relationship, or whether the benefit was simply a byproduct of medieval materials being wonderfully, stubbornly sloppy. Did builders know that their daub would partner with the snow to keep them warm? Or did they just get lucky? Hard to say. But given how many houses were built to face the prevailing winds, it seems like they knew something about cold management. You step outside and examine the wall again. The snowbanks have been shaped, flattened near the base, packed into the corners. You see hand marks where someone smoothed the drift like butter onto bread. Snow acts like a temporary second skin, protecting the fragile daub from winter's tantrums. And here's a surprise. Some villagers added ash or soot to snow before packing it into corners or wall gaps. The theory: darkened snow absorbed more ambient sunlight and melted slower, providing longer-lasting insulation. It's a rudimentary understanding of thermal dynamics, and it turns out kind of brilliant. You're standing next to a snowbank with faint black streaks and thinking, they invented dirty snow on purpose. Amazing. These snow-packed homes weren't without their problems, of course. If the thaw came too quickly, or if someone got greedy with the firewood and heated the inside too fast, you could end up with a half-melted wall. That's never fun to explain to your neighbors. Yes, Gerald, I did ruin the daub again. No, the goats weren't inside this time. Some homes even had temporary snow shutters, little bundles of straw, and snow wedged into open slats or broken corners of the wall. They weren't permanent, but they helped block a nasty draft when winter bit hardest. You see one such patch near the corner of the house, snow packed into a small wooden frame, held in place by sticks and hope. A child runs past, dragging a long stick and sculpting the base of the house with great concentration. It's more than play, it's part of the seasonal maintenance. Kids helped. Everyone helped. You didn't wait for the walls to crumble. You filled the cracks with snow, straw, and whatever else was at hand. It was community insulation. It was survival with a side of creativity. Later that evening, someone tells you how each spring they'd chip away the packed snow carefully, drying the wall to prevent mold. It wasn't just about staying warm, but about planning ahead. The snow helped during winter, but come spring, it could take your walls with it if you weren't careful. You know it. You're starting to get it. Snow wasn't the enemy. It was just another season of labor. You head back inside as the fire dies down. The walls groan softly with the shifting cold, and you swear you can feel the snow pressing in, not crushing, but holding like a gentle arm around your shoulders. The medieval house doesn't fight the snow. It partners with it. It lets it fill in the weak spots, buffer the brittle joints, soften the wind's howl. The dog needs the snow, and somehow the snow obliges. You crawl into your scratchy bed, the wall inches from your shoulder, still warm from the fire. You close your eyes. Outside, the snow builds its quiet embrace. Unpaid labor, flawless fit, no screws or nails required. And for a brief moment, you're grateful for the cold. It's night again, and you're standing in front of a structure that's grander than the usual peasant's cottage. You can feel it in your feet, the shift in air, the way the snow crunches differently beneath your boots. This isn't just another home huddled under a blanket of frost. It's a church, and just beyond it, a castle looming stone and defiant against the dark sky. The wind whistles, the snow drifts, and yet somehow these places manage to feel warmer than you'd expect. Let's go inside. Through the heavy oak door, iron-studded and built like it's daring winter to try something. The temperature drops suddenly in the entry, but then levels out. No blizzard in here. Just the smell of incense, stone, damp wood, and faint heat that seems to come from nowhere. Tonight, you're learning how churches, castles, and chill drafts worked with snow, not just in their foundations, but in the way they manipulated insulation long before central heating was a twinkle in humanity's thermal eye. Let's begin with your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval castles and churches, especially in colder regions, use snow and ice intentionally in their underground crypts and cellars to stabilize temperature. Snow was packed into storage vaults and insulated with straw or stone, turning them into natural cool rooms, or paradoxically, mild warm ones when the outside dropped far below freezing. The stone construction helped retain heat, while snow insulated against wild temperature swings. You walk deeper into the church. The nave is frigid, yes, but oddly calm. Behind the altar, a low door leads to the crypt, a place where bones sleep and snow once worked at magic. Descending the narrow staircase, your breath fogs in front of your face. But again, there's no biting cold. It's cold, but it's even. Gentle somehow, as if the walls are holding the cold in a caring way. The crypt floor is stone, smooth, unfrozen. You can see old alcoves where supplies were once kept in winter. Salted fish, candles, wine, even documents. Snow was occasionally packed behind false walls or into crevices lined with reeds. Over time, it became part of the architecture's memory. Not just something outside to shovel, but something to welcome, briefly, then forget. You press your hand to the wall. The stone is cold but dry, and that's key. Snow, when packed and managed correctly, created stable humidity. That meant fewer ruined scrolls, fewer cracked barrels, just stillness. Your quirky tidbit for tonight. In parts of Bavaria and northern Italy, certain castle architects installed snow chutes, angled shafts leading from exterior courtyards to underground storage rooms. These weren't defense features. They were for dumping snow into interior holding pits that acted as early refrigerators. Some even had small stone dams or baffles to control meltwater. Snow is castle tech. Not exactly thrilling to storm the keep when your enemies are chilling beef on the dining hall. Historians still argue about the scale and frequency of snow use in grand buildings. Was it common? Was it a local oddity? The records are vague. Some believe it was more frequent in colder climates where deep freeze was a threat to stone itself. Others suggest these snow features were only added in times of siege or severe winters. But even in castles designed to repel invaders, snow was let in on purpose. Up in the great hall of the castle, it's a different story. This is where the lords and ladies dined, debated, and occasionally passed out from too much warm mead. It's warmer here, but not because of roaring fires alone. Look at the tapestries, thick, woven, often backed with wool. They didn't just show off your family's dragon obsession. They trapped heat, especially when snow outside was banked high against the stone. Snow helped block wind from sneaking into the cracks of ancient masonry, making the job of those woolen wall hangings just a bit easier. In some cases, servants would intentionally shovel snow against the base of castle towers, not for defense, but for warmth. A thick wall of snow could insulate low-level rooms and keep the moisture from freezing too quickly. Plus, it discouraged rats. Rats hate snow. Which makes sense, they don't exactly have booties. You wander into a castle kitchen, stone hearth, soot-covered rafters, and racks of hanging tools that might also double as weapons in a pinch. Here too, snow once played its role. Barrels packed with snow were kept near storerooms to keep certain perishables stable. Some castle kitchens even had ice trenches, sloped stone basins where melted snow could drain neatly, preventing pooling or freezing. And then there were the cathedrals. Big, drafty, often freezing, right? Well, yes and no. The massive walls of stone often retained more warmth than you'd think. And in winter, priests and monks would insulate vulnerable points, around stained glass, behind altar cloths, even beneath wooden choir stalls, with snowpack straw mats. It wasn't glamorous, but it was God-approved insulation. One monk, writing in the 12th century, even bragged about snow blessed by quietude that clung to the cloister's walls like the angel's wool. Either he was cold and hallucinating, or he'd really figured out the romance of insulation. A final mystery of the night. Some castles had winter chapels, small side rooms used for worship during the coldest months. These chambers were low-ceilinged, heavily insulated with woolen curtains, and often built along walls that collected snowdrifts. The snow outside, once again, did its part, hugging the walls, reducing drafts, and helping prayers rise without freezing halfway up. As you step back into the night, wind nipping at your nose, you glance back at the glowing windows of the church. You realize now it's not just candlelight warming those rooms. It's the snow itself, blocking, buffering, gently holding the edges of these grand ancient spaces. And maybe, just maybe, the snow here remembers more than we do. You wake to find the road has vanished. No, really vanished. The same winding path that took you from cottage to chapel now lies hidden beneath a featureless sweep of snow. No ruts, no footprints, not even the old fence line to guide you. Just a uniform white plain that may or may not contain a chicken coop under your next step. Welcome to the part of winter when medieval travel became a game of guess where the path is. Tonight, we walk through the rituals, oddities, and livestock-based improvisations of snow clearing in the Middle Ages. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. While there was no formal snowplow system in medieval Europe, shockingly, communities developed both improvised and seasonal strategies to manage snow-covered roads. Clearing was done manually, communally, and in some cases, by conscripting animals, oxen, mules, and yes, sheep to stomp snow into navigable paths. It wasn't efficient, but it kept villages from becoming isolated snow globes. You pick your way across the buried road, stepping carefully into depressions where the snow seems slightly more packed. Evidence of foot traffic, or maybe just where a goat panicked and flailed. Along the edge of the path, two men shovel slowly with flat wooden spades. The snow isn't being cleared so much as compressed. That was often the goal. Pack it down, not remove it. Less work, fewer blisters, and no piles to accidentally trip over later. In some places, the snow was deliberately not cleared. The packed roads were used for sleds, wooden runners gliding smoothly over compressed snow. In the Low Countries and Scandinavia, this was even celebrated. Snow meant faster, easier transport for firewood, grain, and sick uncles. Roads became seasonal highways, more efficient than their muddy springtime selves. Who needs wheels when you've got snow and desperation? Your quirky tidbit? In certain Swiss villages, they held a winter festival called Fadstampfen, literally path stomping, where entire families would parade up and down major routes, stomping snow into walkable trails. Children were sometimes encouraged to belly slide as a final polish. It was both practical maintenance and a great excuse for day drinking. But when snow hit harder than expected, surprise blizzards, overnight drifts, the real magic happened. The livestock came out. You hear the distant clinking of bells, and soon enough, two oxen come ambling around a bend, wide planks tied behind their hooves like ridiculous sandals. They're followed by a man waving a stick and humming a tune that's either a prayer or a curse. Oxen and mules were sometimes fitted with makeshift snowshoes, planks, woven mats, or straw pads to help them stomp down drifts. A particularly well-trodden route might be packed enough to support a cart by midday. And if your ox broke through the crust, well, that's why you never travel alone in winter. Historians still argue whether livestock snow clearing was widespread or mostly rural improvisation. Some monasteries mention it, usually with side notes about injuries and broken tools, while noble estate records imply hired workers did the heavy lifting. Either way, by the time snow reached knee height, everyone was involved. You arrive at a frozen crossroads and see a marker, a wooden post with faded carvings. Not decorative, wayfinders. In snowy regions, villagers planted tall stakes along major roads before winter hit. They weren't mile markers, they were survival guides. When the snow covered the world like frosting, poles told you where the road had once been. If your path didn't line up with the next pole, congratulations, you were lost. Some communities even dyed the snow near crossroads using ashes or crushed berries, marking routes with faint trails of gray or purple. Was it pretty? Not particularly. Did it work? Sometimes. And sometimes someone's goat ate the berries and ruined the line. Life was unpredictable. There were also rituals, and medieval folks couldn't resist a good ritual. In parts of Hungary and Austria, the first communal snow clearing of the season was accompanied by songs and cider. Not exactly effective tools, but good for morale. One monk described the tradition as cheering the road to obedience, which sounds ridiculous until you realize he lived in a forest pass with wolves. Snow wasn't just a problem, it was a shift in lifestyle. Mail slowed, markets paused, pilgrims postponed their soul-searching until April. Trade routes across the Alps were closed by November, and messengers had to take detours that doubled travel time. Kings waited for thaw. Wars paused. Even bandits chilled out. But in some places, snow also unlocked access. Rivers that were impassable in summer froze into sturdy bridges. Marshlands hardened, letting carts cross previously impassable terrain. In Russia and parts of Poland, winter roads were considered the best roads, flat, fast, predictable. As long as you didn't fall through. You watch a group of children shoveling snow off the path with wicker baskets. They toss the snow into low drifts on either side, pat it flat, and stomp it down like tiny, determined penguins. One of them slips and laughs so hard she drops her mittens. Another starts a snowball fight that's half maintenance, half mischief. You realize snow clearing wasn't always just a chore. It was community choreography, a rhythm that everyone followed. By dusk, the road begins to take shape again, not fully clear, but defined. You can see where boots have compacted the trail. There are two paths actually, one for foot traffic and one packed wider for sleds or livestock. No signs, no street lamps. Just instinct and repetition. And snow. Always snow. Shaped, stomped, marked, and respected. You follow the path back toward the village, where lanterns flicker in doorways and smoke rises from every chimney. Your boots thud softly on the packed route, and the wind no longer pushes quite so hard. The road is tamed for now, but it never stays that way for long. One more storm, and it's gone again, wiped clean like a chalkboard. And yet, that's part of the beauty. In the medieval world, snow didn't just block the road, it became it. The wind has died down. For now, you're standing outside a small stone cottage, and from where you're standing, it looks like someone buried it in hay. Literally. Along the base of the house, up the outer walls, even draped over the thatched roof, There are thick golden piles of dried hay, bundled and pressed like someone was trying to make a nest big enough for a mammoth. And in a way, they were. Tonight's story belongs to the great hay blanket debate. Whether it was brilliance, desperation, or a house fire waiting to happen, medieval folks insulated their homes with hay. And snow? Snow made the hay work harder. Your mainstream historical fact: hay was used as an insulating material across much of medieval Europe, especially in rural cottages and temporary shelters. Layered against walls and under thatch, it provided a buffer between freezing winds and vulnerable building materials. Add snow, and the hay held it in place, like Velcro for winter. Step closer, and you can see how the hay is packed around the base of the house, held there with lengths of wood, branches, and in some cases, twine made of twisted animal sinew. It's not random. It's method. One family here shows you how it's done. They first stuff any open cracks in the wall with straw or rags, then layer hay along the bottom 3 feet of the cottage. Once the snow falls, and it will, it presses into the hay, sealing it like a snowy, earthy plaster. You run your fingers along the hay. It's rough, dry, and faintly sweet. A mouse skitters out and dives into another clump, and the owner shrugs. They stay on their side. We stay on ours. That's when you get to the quirky historical tidbit. In parts of northern England and southern Germany, there was a belief that a hay-blanketed house would sleep better in winter. Seriously. Some believe the hay muffled not just the wind, but the dreams of the house itself, kept it from groaning in the cold or creaking its joints like an old man. A quiet house meant a peaceful family. A noisy one, trouble brewing. Whether it was superstition or an early form of acoustic engineering, who knows? You step into one such hay-bundled house and feel the change instantly. It's not toasty, but the chill is muted. The walls don't radiate cold the way they did elsewhere. It's like being inside a loaf of bread that someone left near the stove. But here's the debate, and yes, historians still argue about it. Was hay insulation safe, or was it just a fire hazard with good PR? You don't have to be a chimney sweep to realize the risks. Hay burns. So do sparks. And when you add an open hearth, a few coughing embers, and a wall of dry grass, you've basically built a torch. That's why in some areas, local ordinances, well, the medieval version of them, discouraged hay blankets, particularly in towns or villages where houses were built close together. One runaway fire could turn your whole neighborhood into a cautionary tale. Still, people did it. Why? Because fire was only one risk. Freezing to death in your bed was another. And the hay worked, especially when snow locked it in place. A layer of snow atop the hay could smother sparks, shield the grass, and even slow combustion if something went wrong. That's right, snow as a fire retardant. Try marketing snow-safe straw in your next medieval Etsy store. Some clever builders got creative. You walk past a house with woven hay mats that hang like tapestries on the outer wall. They're layered with wool and covered in pressed snow. Removable, reusable, and less flammable than loose hay. Sort of. These mats were common in the Alps, where winters were brutal and sheep plentiful. A few bold designers even coated their hay in mud or clay, turning it into semi-permanent plaster that wouldn't catch fire unless your chimney really committed. There's even record of hay towers, structures built beside houses with hay stacked tightly into wooden frames, not for feeding animals, but for blocking wind. Think of them as medieval windbreaks. Practical. Yes. Ugly. Incredibly. But when it's minus 15 and your toes are threatening to leave your body, aesthetic choices take a back seat to warmth. Later that evening, you sit with a family near the hearth, wrapped in blankets, sipping something spiced and questionably fermented. They talk about the hay fights of childhood, bundles tossed against the house, races to pack the walls before snow hit. The work was hard, but everyone joined in. It was part of the rhythm of the season. Like stacking firewood or finding that one rat-chewed sock from last year, pretending it's still wearable. Outside, the wind is rising, but the snow is falling too. and you watch it layer softly over the hay, pinning it down like a gentle hand. Within hours, the house will be encased, hay inside, snow outside, with warmth trapped somewhere between. You check the walls one last time. They smell of earth and grass, a little musty but comforting. You press your ear to the wall, and just for a second, you swear you hear what that villager mentioned earlier, a house sleeping, breathing slowly, quietly, dreaming through the winter. And in the end, isn't that what we all want? A warm place, a quiet mind, and something, anything, between us and the cold. Morning arrives with the soft thud of something hitting snow. You peek out the window, expecting another shovelful of winter maintenance, but instead, you see a group of children diving in and out of white mounds like rabbits gone rogue. There's laughter, chaos, and what appears to be a catapult made of fence parts. One of them waves a stick in the air, declaring something heroic before immediately tripping over a drift. Yes, it's time we talk about snow forts and feudal fun, because even in the Middle Ages, people couldn't resist turning survival tools into entertainment and tactics. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, particularly in snow-heavy regions like Scandinavia, northern Germany, and the Alpine passes, children and even adults built snow forts, not just for play, but occasionally as practice for military drills or communal games. These structures weren't only for fun. They serve as training, ritual competition, and on occasion, makeshift defense. You step outside and wade toward the nearest snow fort, which is honestly impressive. It's got compacted walls, a tower, and even a small tunnel that opens into a crawl space lined with pine boughs. The kids have been busy. You ask where they learned to build it, and they point to one grinning grandfather seated on a stump with his arms crossed like a general surveying the troops. Turns out, fort building was passed down just like fire tending or soup making. Especially in places where winters lasted 6 months, knowing how to pack and shape snow into a wind-resistant, semi-sheltered structure was considered a basic skill, and snowball fights? Not just mischief, but a chance to practice teamwork, aim, and evasive maneuvers. You laugh, but then someone brings out a wooden shield, and you start wondering if this is still a game. Here comes your quirky tidbit. In some French villages during the late 13th century, snow fort battles were organized events. Teams of boys, and occasionally girls, were assigned strongholds, and others would siege them. The battles could last days, and the conquerors would claim prizes, honey, bread, or for the lucky few, an extra bowl of pottage. One priest even complained in a letter that his congregation was wasting snow upon boyish war rather than bread-making duties. That priest had clearly never taken a snowball to the face. But it wasn't all child's play. Castles themselves sometimes used snow to reinforce defenses in winter. You stand before a squat watchtower near the woods, and one of the guards explains how snow was piled and packed against the inner sides of battlements, keeping icy winds from blowing through the cracks. In emergency cases, snow was heaped into weak points of the outer wall to delay climbing or shield vulnerable wooden scaffolds from fire. Snow could also be used to fake structures. Villagers in Iceland and the Baltic regions reportedly built dummy walls and towers during times of tension, sculpting snow to look like reinforcements. Did it work? Only if the enemy squinted. But it bought time. And this is where things get extra medieval. Some siege preparations involved practice snow battles. Troops would train using snowballs instead of stones, running mock drills with bundled cloaks for shields and wooden spoons for swords. Think of it as low-budget LARPing with hypothermia. There's even one account of Swiss militias in the 14th century practicing ice assaults, where soldiers were taught to climb frozen embankments using hatchets and snowshoes, a dangerous skill, but crucial in mountain warfare. Historians still argue about how common these snow training sessions were. Some believe they were rare, linked to Highland garrisons and elite warrior groups. Others suggest they were more casual, community-driven traditions that blurred the line between drill and play. Either way, snow became not just a barrier, but a tutor teaching discipline, timing, and just how far you could throw a rock before it smacked your cousin in the helmet. Back at the fort, a teenage girl is organizing a reconstruction after a catastrophic collapse caused by someone trying to build a second floor. You watch her issue commands. More snow to the southern wall, reinforced with branches, slope the roof. She's got the authority of someone who knows her structural loads. Medieval engineering might have started in play, but could end up keeping your roof from caving in. Snow forts were sometimes turned into seasonal shrines too. In Finland and Russia, it was tradition to build snow chapels, tiny igloo-like shelters decorated with fir boughs and candle stubs. People would whisper prayers inside, believing that snow absorbed the words and carried them up with the melt. A strangely beautiful idea. Imagine your wishes becoming part of the spring thaw, seeping into the earth, unnoticed but heard. And then there's the snow market. You walk to the village center and find rows of stalls, snow-packed tables, really, where families have shaped counters and benches from frozen water. No carts today. Just bundled vendors, wooden spoons, and icy platforms holding everything from turnips to bone buttons. One seller proudly explains that her stall has lasted 3 weeks. She plans to rebuild when it caves, using better slush. You nod respectfully. Snow wasn't just for survival. It was part of life. Fun, sometimes. Functional often. And occasionally sacred. You watch someone carve a small bird into the wall of a snow hut. Just a doodle, really, but meaningful. There's history in that gesture. Someone else will see it, smile, add their mark. Maybe a heart, maybe a sun, maybe a sword. As night falls again, the snow fort glows faintly from inside. Someone's lit a lantern under a layer of pine. The children curl up, tired from war and trade and falling over dramatically. You smile and walk back toward your own shelter. And in the hush, you think snow may vanish, but the things we build with it, forts, games, laughter, warmth, they linger. In memory, in retellings, in the bones of old houses and old hearts. It's well past midnight, and you're curled up in your usual corner near the hearth. Layers of wool and animal hides wrapped around you like a medieval burrito. The fire's burned low, the room is dark, and every breath you take comes out in a slow mist. But you're not freezing. Not exactly. And that's surprising, because under your bedding, beneath the scratchy wool and the hay-stuffed mattress, there's snow. Cold, packed, deliberate. Tonight, we tuck into the curious tale of how some medieval folk quite literally slept on ice. Start with your mainstream historical fact. In regions with severe winters and permafrost terrain, Scandinavia, Siberia, the high Alps, and even parts of northern Russia, it was not unheard of to build sleeping platforms on top of snowpack bases. Sometimes this was out of necessity. Sometimes, astonishingly, it was intentional. You roll off your current pile of furs and peer beneath the bed platform. Sure enough, there's a base of wooden planks raised on stones, and beneath it, there's a shallow pit. Snow has been compacted underneath and topped with straw. The idea is simple. The snow stays cold, but stable. The platform, suspended just above it, doesn't lose heat to the frozen ground, and with the straw and wooden base absorbing the worst of the chill, your body heat actually stays closer to you. This isn't exactly cozy in the modern sense, but for people in timber-scarce or storm-prone regions, it worked. With minimal contact with a frozen earth, you avoided the worst of the heat loss. It's a bit like sleeping on a cold sandwich, but at least it wasn't directly on the floor. And here comes your quirky historical tidbit. Some families in northern Russia added fur-lined snowboards under beds, thin planks with packed snow and animal pelts underneath, creating a heat-buffering layer they swore refreshed the dreams. These weren't for comfort. They were for survival and, oddly, dream management. One 14th century folktale from the Urals describes snow sleeping as pulling the breath of the earth to your heart, which sounds nice until your nose freezes mid-snore. You sit with an older couple by the hearth, and the man explains how each winter they reset the floor. They lift the platform, shovel out the old compacted snow, and layer in fresh snow, then a thick pad of straw, sometimes even moss if it's dry enough. The snow keeps things level and firm, and as long as you keep it dry from above, It becomes just another layer in the household's insulation plan. You ask the obvious question, doesn't it melt? And here's the brilliant bit, it doesn't. At least, not much. The snow is protected by the platform, and the heat from the fire rarely reaches that low. The air between floor and snow acts like a buffer. And any slight melt, it's absorbed by the straw or directed to runoff trenches carved beneath the cottage. In more sophisticated homes, especially in alpine regions, they even used gravel-filled channels to drain away excess water without disturbing the packed snow base. Historians still argue whether this technique was widespread or mostly limited to mountain and tundra communities. There's little written evidence in Western European sources, but archaeological digs and oral traditions in the Carpathians, the Siberian steppes, and even Iceland suggest that snow flooring and snowpack bedding areas were a quiet cornerstone of winter life. There's also an unexpected benefit to snow bedding: vermin control. Snowpacking the base of a home or sleeping area could reduce rodent infestations. Mice weren't exactly eager to tunnel into icy corridors, and fleas hated the cold. For families that otherwise lived in intimate proximity to livestock, this was practically luxury hygiene. Some wealthier families even took it a step further. In Germanic territories, travelers occasionally recorded snow-lined sleeping benches in winter goose houses, wooden platforms hollowed slightly underneath and filled with packed snow sealed in with planks and a layer of fir boughs. They weren't permanent. Come spring, they were disassembled, dried, and stored. But during the frozen months, they made the difference between a miserable night and a survivable one. And just when you think you've heard it all, someone in the room mentions the sleep burrows, small hollows carved into snowbanks and lined with fur, used during extended hunts or in extreme snowfalls when shelter wasn't available. These weren't full igloos, just nests, basically. One hunter recalls curling into a snow burrow with 2 dogs and waking up warmer than in his own bed. Slightly wetter, yes, but warmer. As your eyelids grow heavy, you think about how sleep changes in winter. Shorter days, longer nights, less light, more waiting. Everything in the medieval rhythm slows down. Fires dim. Voices drop. The world pulls its blanket higher. And beneath you, under the straw, wood, and whatever pelts you haven't kicked off in your sleep, snow lies quietly, working. It doesn't scream to be noticed. It doesn't demand glory, but it's doing the work, holding the cold where it belongs, just below. You curl up again, the last of the fire whispering into ash. Outside, snow taps softly against the shutters, and inside, everything is still. And whether you dreamed better because of the cold, or because you were tired from stomping hay and chasing goats, you'll never really know. But either way, you'll dream. You wake with the distinct sense that something has shifted. Not inside your cozy snow buffer hut. No, everything in here is exactly as it should be, smoky, wool-scented, and vaguely sticky in ways you've stopped trying to understand. It's outside. The snow feels different, thicker, stranger. You crack open the door and blink into a swirl of white. It's not just snowing. It's snowing sideways. The flakes are big, wet, and falling in diagonals that make your face question the laws of gravity. But nestled between drifts and beneath layers of frost, the buildings around you seem oddly serene. This is the kind of storm that makes you grateful for every snow-packed wall and hay-covered roof you've passed on this journey. And it's also the perfect time to explore one of the weirdest insulation methods ever to exist, that one Russian thing. Yes, this is the section where we slide into the slightly mystical, mostly practical, borderline magical Slavic use of compacted snow, not just for warmth, but for something more. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Slavic territories, from the forests of Kievan Rus to the snowy expanse of early Muscovy, peasants, travelers, and religious communities used compacted snow walls and snow-layered huts as essential winter structures. But these weren't always just for physical shelter. They were also steeped in ritual and superstition. You duck into a squat snow-covered structure just beyond the village edge. It's shaped almost like a mound, with a tiny carved entry and a faint scent of juniper smoke inside. A woman sitting in the center stirs a pot over a pit fire. She doesn't greet you. She just nods once and gestures for you to close the flap. Inside, it's quiet, damp, warm, in the way of mossy caves and good secrets. You sit cross-legged and watch her press snow into the cracks near the door, deliberately, repetitively. This isn't just to stop a draft. This is something older. And now your quirky tidbit. In some parts of medieval Russia and Ukraine, there was a belief that snow could trap spirits. Not in a malicious way, more like an atmospheric airlock. By building walls of compacted snow around huts and cabins, people believed they were blocking not only the wind, but unseen forces, griefs, and bad dreams. Snow to them wasn't just insulation. It was liminal, between water and air, silence and sound, seen and unseen. Some households in remote regions would sing as they packed snow around their homes. Songs with no lyrics, just tones, meant to bind the air and keep the cold from stealing voices. Monks in the north recorded these rituals in marginal notes, often puzzled but respectful. One even wrote, "They do not curse winter, they wrap it in lullabies." You glance around the hut again. The walls are reinforced with snow blocks, but not like an igloo. They've been etched faintly, symbols, maybe runes, maybe decorative squiggles that once meant something precise and now just feel vaguely mystical. Circles, suns, tree-like spirals. Protective, decorative. You're not sure. Historians still argue whether this practice, snow magic, for lack of a better term, was widespread or mostly regional. Some dismiss it as peasant folklore. Others argue it was embedded in a broader worldview where snow wasn't dead space. It was a living, porous thing that needed guidance, control, respect. And weirdly enough, there's something scientific buried under the woo-woo. Some Slavic winter shelters were constructed entirely underground, their roofs formed by compacted snow and straw, supported by wooden ribs. These half-homes were built into slopes or riverbanks. From the outside, they looked like snowy lumps. Inside, they were often warmer than surface homes, stable in temperature, and far more resistant to sudden weather shifts. One such technique, called zemlyanka, literally dugout, was used for centuries. During particularly harsh winters, entire families moved into these snow-topped dens. They weren't elegant, but they were safe, quiet, and immune to wind. Even the smoke from the hearth vented slowly, hidden by the snow cover. Back in your hut, the woman finally speaks. "The snow remembers," she says simply. "You nod, because what else can you do?" You're starting to believe it too. You step back outside. The storm is still raging, but the snow no longer feels hostile. It clings and cradles, buffers and buries. Every building wears its own snowy crown, every roofline softened to a whisper. The world is quiet again, and watching. Before heading back, you walk to the edge of a clearing where a ring of snow-covered stones marks an old spirit well. At least that's what the locals call it. No water, just packed snow, refilled each winter and covered with evergreen boughs. No one drinks from it, but they visit, whisper into the snow, leave small carvings behind. You see one there now, a little wooden rabbit, probably carved by a child, or a priest. Who knows? The snow has taken the shape of people's fears, warmth, hopes, and ghosts. It is insulator, yes, but also listener, preserver, mask, blanket, wall, and maybe an ancient confidant. You head back, cloak pulled tight, boots creaking with every step. The wind howls, but it doesn't touch you. Your hut waits, silent, snow-covered, and sealed like a secret box. You step inside, the door clicks shut, and the world narrows to a small fire and your own breathing. Outside, the snow keeps its vigil. The sun finally comes back, not in full blazing glory, but in that soft, pale way winter light reintroduces itself after a long silence. It glimmers across the surface of the snow like a sigh. Trees shimmer. Roofs drip slowly. And for the first time in what feels like weeks, you can see the ground peeking through in places, muddy, stubborn, and still half asleep. You walk the path one more time, tracing footprints now partially erased by melt. There's no wind, just stillness. The kind that arrives after a season of work, cold, and quiet cooperation with the elements. Because snow, as it turns out, isn't permanent. It stays long enough to hold your house together, to keep your potatoes from rotting, to insulate your boots with last year's hay, and then it leaves. And with it, so much memory melts too. Tonight's final stretch is about meltdown and memory loss. How snow came, saved lives, shaped survival, and then disappeared, taking much of its story with it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Snow was never fully documented in medieval life as a tool. While chroniclers spoke of plagues, kings, harvests, and comets, they rarely wrote detailed notes on how the average peasant managed their winter, how they stacked snow, packed it, shaped it, relied on it. Much of this knowledge lived and died in the daily rhythms of rural people who rarely left behind written records. Step into one of the cottages now, as spring whispers at the door. The hay's been pulled away from the walls. The snow blocks are cracking and dripping. Someone's sweeping water out the front step with a bundle of twigs. It's cleanup season. And in cleanup comes forgetting. Because snow, for all its work, never sticks around for applause. Your quirky tidbit tonight? In a few isolated Slavic and Scandinavian communities, children were told that if they remembered snow too fondly, it would come back angry. Seriously. To talk too much about snow's help, its comfort, its silence, was to tempt a harder storm the next year. So instead, they thanked the melt, praised the mud, called spring a forgiving mother and winter a sleeping wolf. Snow was never seen as neutral. It had moods, and it watched. You moved through the village and noticed the shift. Snow that was lovingly packed against houses is now a nuisance. Slush creeps in under doors. Ice turns to puddles. People start muttering about boots, rot mold. The blessing becomes burden again. Like everything else, snow is only a gift when it's just cold enough to obey. One older woman speaks softly as she sweeps out the snowmelt water from her threshold. We forget, she says, because forgetting is what spring is for. You ask what she means. She shrugs. You only survive winter if you stop talking about it when it ends. Historians still argue whether this forgetting was cultural, or just a result of snow being too normal to document. Why bother writing about snow walls and packed eaves and straw-lined boots when everyone did it? It was like breathing, essential, invisible. And yet, centuries later, almost all of it has vanished. No diagrams, no manuals, just hints, fragments, stories about hay, soot, and packed snow being used in ways that, to us, feel like magical nonsense, but to them were survival. You take one last walk past the barn, now dripping from every beam. The snow piles, once so precise, so dense, are melting into soft slopes of slush. The markers are disappearing. Footprints fill with water. Even the snow pit, once so carefully sealed, is just a shallow crater now, half mud, half memory. That's the tragedy of snow as a tool. It doesn't leave a record. It performs, then dissolves. It builds walls and buffers roofs and softens howls, but it doesn't fossilize. It evaporates. And when the people who knew how to use it died, much of that quiet, cold brilliance went with them. You return to your hut one last time, where someone has already begun pulling apart the packed snow around the base. They smile and tell you it's time to let the house breathe. That feels right. The snow protected it all season. Now the thaw will wake it up. You sit by the fire again, smaller now, not needed as much, and watch water drip from the edge of the roof in a slow, steady rhythm. And in that soft dripping, something settles. A kind of ending. A kind of goodbye. And now, as the last of the snow melts into the soft mud of memory, let the rhythm of your breath slow with it. Inhale. Feel the chill fade, not rush, but gentle. Like a snowbank slipping down a rooftop in spring, slow and easy. The creak of old beams, the quiet drip of meltwater, the hush that arrives not with silence, but with release. Exhale. Let go of the weight of straw and soot, of wet cloaks and icy boots. The snow has done its part. It held the walls, muffled the wind, and cradled the light in quiet ways. It asked for no credit. It simply did what needed doing. And now, like so many things from the past, it fades. You're warm, safe, tucked in beneath wool and story, surrounded by what once was cold but is now just memory. The walls hold. The fire hums. And far above, in that pale sky that once snowed like it meant something, a single cloud drifts away. You're still. And the world, this snowy, forgotten, whispering world, is still with you. Not pressing in. Not asking for anything. Just holding the quiet. Let your eyelids fall now. Let the last snowflake of thought dissolve. And sleep.